Hello, all, and welcome to Regulated Habits Meetup. Today's meetup is going to be a recording, and so you may be seeing this here on the Facebook chat that belongs to this group, or you may be seeing this on YouTube. The theme for week 9, officially today, is about rest as a time to rebuild purpose. And if you're part of this group, you have a copy of this PDF, but I go over some of the important aspects of utilizing rest effectively. And as you know, if you are a part of this group, this is all about learning how to use your habits to support nervous system regulation. So it's important to recognize that regulation is not always calm. It's not always, peaceful. Sometimes it's stimulated. And in fact, the most, I would say, balanced regulation that someone can experience is about 50% stimulated, 50% calm. And ideally, we're able to flexibly move in and out of the zones of stress. If you have been following my work, you know that I use the traffic light analogy, green light response being the ventral vagal parasympathetic branch, the lowest level of stress, moving up to the yellow zone, like a yellow light in a traffic light, the sympathetic fight flight mobilized response, where there's awareness and movement oriented symptoms in the mind and the body. And then finally, the red light response corresponding to the dorsal vagal parasympathetic branch and how that branch is characterized by immobilization symptoms. So it's a shutdown of awareness. It's a shutdown of movement. It's a shutdown of movement physically, emotionally, mentally. Apathy, for example, is an immobilized red light type of symptom. Depression, numbness, dissociation, lack of awareness, spacing out, even passing out. That's all up at that highest level of stress. And you can think about that as both pressing the brake and the gas at the same time in a car. The stress levels are high, but they're so high that a shutdown is what the body ends up going into. Okay, so how does this all apply to rest? So specifically, I'm going to talk mostly about rest between workouts. I highly advocate working on your strength and building your muscle mass. And this is on a microscopic level, so you don't need to worry about getting bulky when it comes to building muscle mass. I'm just going to reiterate, I've said this before, muscle takes up a fifth the space of fat, and it is quite a bit heavier. So as you gain muscle mass, you actually get smaller, leaner. Ask any man who has high levels of testosterone, or women for that matter, and ask them how difficult it is to put on muscle. It takes a lot of hard work, a lot of volume, a lot of sets, repetitions, multiplied that by 10, 20, 100. If you look at bodybuilders, their overall volume is insanely high in terms of how much work they do to build that bulk in muscle. But they also incorporate a ton of rest. Some of them will sleep 10 hours every night, even 11 or 12 hours if they can manage it. And this is really important to allow the body to go into rest and recovery mode. So if you think about it in terms of those color-coded levels of stress and branches of the autonomic nervous system, when you're in the green light zone, that's not where working out happens. That's where recovery happens, right? But you have to move up into the yellow light sympathetic based mobilization zone in order to muster the energy to challenge yourself, to properly get your muscles to adapt, to get stronger, to build muscle mass. And this requires a high level of activation, right about in the middle zone. But if we push it too hard, that's where we overtrain and we numb out. We become less aware of what our bodies need. And sometimes this requires trial and error, because you can take a particular workout regimen that you see, let's say, in Men's Health magazine, for example. And it says, okay, well, in order to build muscle mass, you need to have enough volume, so 10 sets per muscle group per week, that's something to shoot for eventually, because your body will adapt and you'll be able to handle that much volume at a relatively high intensity if you give it proper rest. But you can't do that right away. If you've never worked out before, or if you've not worked out for a couple of years in a particular way. So I'll give you an example that I'm experiencing right now. So I just went back to free weight training. That is using barbells, dumbbells, bench press, squat, barbell curls, side raises, all deadlifts, all these different exercises to cover all the different muscle groups. In my particular workout, for the last couple of years, I've mostly defaulted to body weight training. So although that is really effective for building strength in the right context, I decided it was time to up the ante and to get to the next level of development for myself. At this stage in my life, I've lowered my stress load significantly. I've improved my income. I've improved my quality of life. Looking at the 4 pillars of nervous system regulation, my physical habits are doing great, and I'm upping the ante with those. My environmental triggers, I've minimized those in this apartment that I live in now. I have minimized my relational triggers in the 3rd pillar, in my relationships, particularly my attachment relationship. It has the least amount of triggers of any relationship I've ever experienced. And so I'm a lot more regulated. I have a lot lower level of stress in my body. And then finally, the 4th layer, mindset, which follows the first 3. If your physical habits, your environment, and your relationships are aligned, just so your mental patterns, your habits, the way you think, being optimistic, pragmatic rather than, magical thinking, right? Being practical. These are all things in the 4th pillar of nervous system regulation that happen automatically. And yeah, you can pay attention to them, but really they indicate what's going on in the first 3 pillars: physical habits, your environment, and in your relationships. All of these 3 first pillars affect the 4th pillar, the mental habits you experience, because the state of the body shapes how we feel, how we think, how we behave. And a lot of the work that I do has to do with healing trauma, which is a deeper level of looking at, okay, so what physical habits are naturally happening? What are my behaviors that happen without me thinking about it, my default? And in my environment, what triggers are happening based on my past? And in my relationships, how is that reflected in my relationships, whether they're more dysregulated or more regulated? Lots of triggers in my environment through my relationships, or lots of glimmers, lots of positive experiences, which enhance my relationships. And the relationship pillar is the most powerful when it comes to regulating your nervous system. Okay, so putting all of that aside, I have recently started weight training with heavy weights again. Now, I defaulted to starting a little bit slower than I did when I was using free weights a couple of years ago. But there's an experimentation in this to figure out where your body is now. And I missed a couple of cues because there are so many cues, and what we're aware of is the tip of the iceberg. What's underneath in the unconscious? Well, we kind of have to experiment sometimes and calibrate, adjust what our habits are according to how our bodies respond. So my upper body workout through, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I broke up, chest and biceps on Monday, and back and triceps on Tuesday, shoulders, and a particular part of my core, sides and rotation. That's how I broke my particular body part workouts up. But then on Thursday was the front and the back aspects of core, and Friday, lower body. And I put lower body all into one day because I like to move with my lower body a lot. And so if you work your lower body too hard in your workouts, it makes it very difficult to run or to skateboard like I do, or any other activity where you're moving around with your legs. So you want to challenge yourself strength wise, but you want to be careful about the volume. And when you're first going into it, you want to be careful about how intense you begin. So I learned my lesson this week. My calves and my legs and a little bit in my back, they're definitely talking to me. They are way more sore than I was anticipating. And so my job now is not to go, oh man, Mike, why didn't you know that? Why didn't you have a magic crystal ball that would tell you exactly how much intensity, how much volume would work for you? Well, there's a calibration and experimentation that goes on. And so you adjust. So I know that I need to back way off on my legs, even more so, even though I thought I went easy on my legs. I used to squat around 400 plus pounds, and same with deadlift. It was a little heavier. So doing sets at 225 pounds with two plates on each side, that to me felt like, okay, that's starting easy. I warmed up with lighter than that, obviously, and I went to my, moderate to heavy sets. And then I started to notice on one of my deadlift repetitions, my back was like, oh, you can't be doing that. It wasn't happy. I felt the beginning signs that I might pull something. Something may be out of alignment. My tonus, that is unconscious muscular tension levels, were higher than I realized. And I stopped right there. I didn't do any more sets with deadlift. And I realized, okay, I'm going to need some recovery time. So this was actually a coincidence that the theme for today, this week, is about recovery, to rebuild your purpose, to recalibrate, to regenerate your cells, your muscle cells in this case. It just happened to fall into place. How cool is that? And I have a direct experience that I can share about around recovery. So yesterday and today, my legs are particularly sore. And so it's important to recognize that recovery doesn't mean being sedentary. Yes, you need extra sleep. Yes, you need to make sure to drink enough water so that your body is hydrated. You have enough water in your cells, H2O, to allow for that recovery process to be supported. You need proper amounts of protein. You need carbohydrates, the healthy forms of them, not the processed sugar or refined flours, for example. And you need fats to support hormonal health and brain health and your nervous system function in general. Okay, so all of that aside, what's important is to recognize that rest involves significantly lowering your intensity. Okay, and so I'm going to bring up a chart here that shows the basics of the energy systems that our body uses. And this is taken from Dr. Michael Colgan's book. Uh, it's called The New Power Program. Now, it's not so new. It's actually been around for over 2 decades now, perhaps three. I don't recall exactly when he put it out, but it was groundbreaking information. He is an exercise physiologist at a doctorate level, and he trains Olympians. He even uses methods that people you may have heard of. Aside from Olympians, probably you've heard of plenty of Olympians, but we're talking back in the 90s when he was working with them primarily. He used methods that bodybuilders you may have heard of before have used to gain the success that they achieved. Ever heard of Arnold Schwarzenegger? He used methods very similar to what Michael Colgan used to support training his Olympic athlete clients. Okay, so this chart is taken from his book, and it shows the basic energy systems that our body uses. Now, it's important to recognize that there are very complex physiological processes going on, different muscle fibers that are active in each of these systems, different types of energy that are being utilized, from ketones and fats to carbohydrates to even protein. Sometimes if we don't have enough energy stores, we use protein in the form of muscle. We burn muscle. That's why it's important to get proper nutrition. We don't want to lose muscle. We need fat. I think I mentioned that in the beginning. Okay, so carbs, protein, fat, ketones. I won't get into all of that. But needless to say, it's important to recognize what energy system you're in for what you're trying to accomplish. Okay, so when you're trying to build strength, it's really important that your intensity, the heaviness of your weight, is sufficient to trigger a strength adaptation. Now, the only way to be sure that you're reaching that level, and by the way, this takes a lot of preparation, weeks, months, perhaps, before you challenge yourself on this level. you want to make sure that you're, for example, a bench press. So if you can only do barely 6 repetitions, okay, you're just barely in the zone where you're building strength. Any less weight, any less intensity, and you're going to be in a different energy system. If you can only get 1 or 2, that's a different energy system as well. So the highest intensity of energy, so think of a 1 repetition maximum of bench press, for example, or squat where you can't possibly do any more than 1 rep, and you have all this preparation, you have to psych yourself up, okay? Maybe you're going to do a sprint, but it's only 40 meters long, so it's less than 5 seconds. For people who are competitive, that 40 meters is finished. That sprint is finished in under 5 seconds. The fastest people in the world are, closer to 4.1 seconds, and so on. Like running backs in football, for example. And a matter of fact, that's how they measure speed in football, is a 40-meter dash, to see, okay, how fast are you able to run that 40 meters? Okay, that is the highest intensity energy system, and it is anaerobic, meaning it does not require oxygen. So the energy that is used is from glucose that breaks into, it's a form of carbohydrate that breaks into ATP. It stands for adenosine triphosphate. Adenosine, tri, meaning 3 phosphates. So adenosine and phosphate are there, and there are 3 phosphates. Every time a phosphate is, you might say, removed from that molecule of ATP, it releases energy. That is how energy is released into the mitochondria in your cells, so that all your cells can function. But in this particular example, muscle cells, right? So as that 1 phosphate is removed and energy is released, it creates adenosine diphosphate. Okay, 2 phosphates are left. And if 1 more is released from that molecule, it becomes adenosine monophosphate, AMP. ADP, ATP for tri, DP, MP, right? Okay, so that happens without oxygen needing to be present, meaning that your breathing doesn't directly affect that intense 1 repetition maximum bench press or squat or sprint, right? Technically, you could hold your breath and you can get through it. You wouldn't be comfortable, but you could do it, because the energy available is anaerobic, non-oxygen. Aerobic meaning oxygen, and meaning not anaerobic. Okay, so the next level of energy system is the ATP creatine phosphate shuttle. So the adenosine triphosphate, when a phosphate is released, guess what? Creatine phosphate gives a phosphate back to that ATP molecule, or the ADP molecule, right? And makes it as adenosine triphosphate again. And it uses energy for that, and maybe goes down to monophosphate. The creatine keeps adding phosphates back on so that more energy is available to use. Now, this happens at a slightly reduced intensity. Okay, so the ATP creatine phosphate shuttle, the creatine phosphate keeps shuttling phosphate back to that ATP so that it can continue to produce more. So when you take creatine phosphate, it helps your muscle cells to have more energy for that high intensity training, which is why you can build a lot more strength a lot faster when you supplement creatine. Now, this doesn't just apply to your muscle cells and mitochondria in your muscles. It also applies to the neuron cells in your brain. It applies to your digestion cells, to your immune system cells. And those systems don't rely on ATP as much as muscles do, because they're constantly needing more phosphates to be added, right? So I went a little bit more in depth into the biochemistry than I was planning here, but suffice it to say, it's important to understand that exercise that will create strength, will build muscle, requires this high level of intensity, okay? And when you do those exercises, you need to do them at a certain volume. How many sets, how many repetitions, 6 or less, right? And you need to make sure you have recovery time, a couple of days. So I just talked about my particular workout regimen where I break it down into a particular set of muscle groups per week. Well, by the time I get back to my day one on Monday, typically, chest and biceps, it's been a full week of recovery. That allows me to work at a maximum level to challenge my chest and my biceps to become stronger and give it a full week of recovery before I come back to it again, which is why I've broken down those days into 1 or 2 muscle groups per day so that by the time I get back around to it, it's at a full week of recovery. Okay, so what am I doing with those muscles in the meantime? Well, I'm not being sedentary. I'm obviously working other muscles, but you can't help but use most of the muscles in your body when you do full body movements. Like when you're walking, you're actually using your chest a bit, right? Because you're swinging your arms, you're using your shoulders, maybe even your biceps as you swing your arms and allow your elbow to extend and flex. Okay. So that is really important to understand here. When I talk about recovery, when you recover muscle, uh, strength training from strength training work, you need to make sure that you're not sedentary because as you move, you're getting more blood flow to those muscles so that it can enhance recovery. It can improve that recovery. Yes, getting enough sleep, getting enough proper nutrition, getting enough hydration with water, and water-rich foods like fruits and vegetables that are not processed. These are all ways of supporting your recovery. But as you go through that recovery, let's get to these other energy systems. So the next energy system down does require oxygen. It's considered aerobic, meaning it relies on oxygen to keep functioning. So if you do a set of, let's use the example of bench press again, and you're able to do at least the amount of repetitions that lasts 30 seconds, up to 2 minutes, 120 seconds. Okay. This uses glycogen and glucose in the muscles. And once you run out of glycogen and glucose, and by the way, that's source of ATP, you also use the glycogen that's stored in your liver. But the point of understanding this is that when you're doing weight training at this level, you're not stimulating a high enough intensity to build strength and building muscle not necessarily as efficiently. It's a different type of muscle, but that's another conversation. You can use this lighter type of exercise, I would say no more than 50% of your max intensity, whereas strength training that's actually effective is going to be 70, 80, 90%. It's going to be a lot more intense when you move in a way that's more gentle. So, for example, I'm going to take this off the screen here and I'm going to demonstrate. Whew, my legs are sore. Okay, I'm going to go into a squat position. Now, in order to get down into the squat position, I'm using my muscles, but I don't have any weight on top of me. There's no extra load here, but I'm going deep into a lengthened state of my quads, of my hamstrings, of my gluteals, of my inner thigh, my adductors. All of these muscles are now lengthened, and I have the load of just my body weight. So it's a very light intensity. So it's like that intensity that I talked about up to 120 seconds. For me, I can feel this in my shins, I can feel this in my thighs and in my back muscles a little bit. What I'm doing is I'm being active, but it's very gentle. This is called active rest. So I can either hold it here and feel how the stretch is happening with a little bit of swing and movement. If you can't get all the way into a deep, full ass to grass squat like this, then you don't have to go that deep. The idea is to find ways to shift your weight and engage the muscles very gently. And this is all, the intensity is relative to what your body is capable of doing. So if you are capable of doing that easily, like I just showed, great, that's active rest for you. But for somebody else who has a really difficult time you doing body weight squats, that may be too intense. And that may be, something that you can only last 30 seconds or less, maybe even less than that. Okay. So Active rest that supports the recovery of your muscles from strength training work is deeply supported by getting more blood flow to those muscles and by moving at an intensity that is much lower. So going back to this chart, looking at that glycogen and glucose aerobic level of what Dr. Michael Colgan refers to ineffective weight training, meaning it doesn't help you adapt and get stronger. When you do lots and lots of repetitions at a weight that's light enough that you can do it for, a solid minute or two, you're not challenging your muscles in terms of strength enough that you will get any stronger over time. That may help maintain the muscle that you have, but it's not helping you improve very much. There are a lot of reasons to do this level of weight training. For example, for women for hormonal health, that lower level intensity can be very beneficial for women. That's another conversation. But what I'm talking about here is the important use of active rest. That is moving, not being sedentary, just sitting around. Instead, moving, going on a light walk. So this brings us to now the next energy system where cardio happens, cardiovascular exercise. So if you're going for a jog and you're able to go for, you can jog for longer than 2 minutes. You can jog for 20 minutes, for 30 minutes, for an hour, perhaps for a couple of hours. So this system actually lasts for up to 30 hours. It's fueled by oxygen, so how you're breathing in the last energy system I mentioned, glycogen and glucose, as well as this one, the glycogen, fats, and amino acids system. This is where marathons are run. This is where even triathlons and ultra distance running or biking for, hours and hours and hours, this system will allow you to last up to 30 hours if you are sufficiently trained on a cardiovascular level. Cool. Okay, so this is the level at which it's most helpful to do active rest. Active rest supports the recovery from your workout by continuing to move. And I'd like to highlight something that's not on the handout, the PDF handout, but very important for the method that I teach, holistic fitness training, that supports regulation of the nervous system. So whenever you inhale, I'm going to talk about breathing and how breathing helps aid recovery. Not only during recovery time, it's also helpful when you're stretching. It's also helpful when you're doing strength training in different ways. But let me just break down a little bit of what each aspect of the breathing mechanism does as far as the nervous system is concerned, as well as increasing oxygen or releasing carbon dioxide. Okay, so when you inhale, generally speaking, it elevates the stress response. So if you're surprised and you breathe in deeply using your mouth, that's a lot more oxygen than using your nose, which is a little bit more titrated, like small doses is what that means. You're going to get a smaller amount of oxygen than if you breathe into your mouth. That's the most stimulating into the upper chest. Like you're surprised, look at my body language. The body does that to prepare you, to help you become more alert. So you get more oxygen to your system and it revs up and creates more alertness in the system. It stimulates your nervous system. Okay, so in a general sense, it's important to understand that inhales are stimulating. Exhales are calming. Your heart rate and blood pressure and everything will calm the longer you exhale, focusing on like you're breathing through a small straw by pursing your lips, or you can use your throat to resist, making it take longer for the air to come out, or you can hum with the added value of the vibration of the vocal cords to stimulate the vagus nerve. This helps further calm the system. That's why in a lot of meditation chants, like in yogic traditions from the Vedic texts, they have you Om. There's a lot more to it, but the vibration does stimulate the vagus nerve, help to calm the system, and it's focused on lengthening your exhale. Okay, so now that you understand that inhales are stimulating, getting more oxygen to your system, Exhales are calming, releasing carbon dioxide. It's a waste product that the lungs release through your exhale. How do you use breathing to aid your recovery? Okay, so think about the importance of getting oxygen to your muscles so that they can improve the recovery, because they need oxygen in order to recover properly. And there's this whole respiration on a cellular level. You can, that's respiration with your breath, but that respiration process also goes for the blood that is now more oxygenated because you just breathed in, got more oxygen to your bloodstream, and that goes to all of your cells, and that respiration process happens on a cellular level as well. Okay, so this aids in recovery. Whenever you inhale, you're getting more oxygen to your system, but keep in mind, you're also stimulating your nervous system. So there's only so much stimulation before your body has too much and it becomes overwhelmed. So I'm breaking down these pieces of the breathing mechanism so you understand how to use it. So if, for example, you're trying to wake up your system to become more aware of your body so that you can let go of tension, well, you can start to pay attention to the signals, the sensations in your body, from your chest to your solar plexus to your belly, all of your internal organs. They're sensory neurons there that help you to get feedback. As you inhale, go ahead and try a deep inhale with your mouth. And then notice, is there a change in sensation? Do you feel tingling, a change in temperature, change in pressure, change in a sense of weight, lightness, or heaviness? There could be a lot of different sensations. Maybe it's very subtle, like energy, flow, movement, vibration. Could be a lot of things. But you want to breathe in and notice, what was the change in sensation here? Okay, so you can calibrate, that is, take note of how much stimulation, how much oxygen your body actually needs based on the feelings you get here. If your exercise is intense, you're going to be a little numbed out. You're not going to be able to feel as much, but you also need more oxygen. You also need that stimulation to keep that effort, that exertion up. Okay, so you're going to inhale a lot more when you're exerting yourself in exercise, but when you're in recovery, or after your workout, the days following, when you're moving around gently in that lower energy system that I mentioned, you want to make sure to breathe in a way where you're getting enough oxygen without getting a head rush, without feeling anxious, for example. These are obvious tells that you have too much oxygen, that you're breathing in too deeply, too quickly. It's causing dysregulation as far as too much activation of the sympathetic branch of the nervous system. All right, so noticing the subtlety of the sensations in your front, you want to just inhale. And again, continuing to check in with the sensations. As soon as you feel a shift in sensation, that's enough. Okay, that's a subtle level of improved activation of the sympathetic nervous system, enough that you're getting more oxygen to your tissues. So let's say you're in a deep squat, or let's say you're doing a stretch, a forward, seated forward bend to stretch your hamstrings and the muscles in your spine. And as you're doing that gentle stretch, you're moving gently, and you're definitely in one of those lower level energy systems, because you could hang out here for a while. It's not too intense. You're inhaling with your nose if you want to make sure you don't get too much oxygen too quickly, or your mouth if you want to make sure to get a lot of extra oxygen to your system. And continue to notice, okay, how much is enough? Okay, I feel a shift. I feel actually a little bit of cool sensation in my chest from the breaths that I just demonstrated. Okay, that's enough. All right, let me do my movement and continue to breathe normally. Okay, cool. Now I'm going to focus on lengthening my exhale, because in order to, in this example, stretch, as I'm doing a seated forward bend to stretch my hamstrings and my spinal muscles, I need to make sure my muscles are actually relaxed. Otherwise, I'm just pulling against muscle fibers that are still contracted, right? This happens on an unconscious level. In order to properly stretch, we'll focus on that in another episode. You want to make sure that your muscles are as relaxed as possible. They need to be warm. Again, that's another conversation. But in focusing on breathing for recovery, I want you to just notice, okay, what are the subtle signals, the sensations in the front of your body here? Might even be in your head or your throat, but often it's in the chest, the solar plexus, the gut feelings, you might say, The sensations that you tune into here are going to give you a lot better ability to calibrate how much is enough on the inhales. So let's break down a little bit more about how to breathe to support respiration, to support recovery. Okay. Whether you're doing gentle movement or stretches, some sort of active rest to support those muscles continuing to move, but at a lower intensity. I want you to notice the different areas where you can breathe. You can breathe into your upper lungs and allow your chest to expand and lift. You might even let your shoulders come up. That's a deep upper lung breath. Okay, so that's one area you can expand. Remember, I said that area, when you expand it and focus there, is also stimulating in addition to the inhale being stimulating. But when you breathe down into your lower lungs, letting your belly expand, so your diaphragm drops, that deep inhale down low is a more calming, even though the inhale is stimulating, you're getting more oxygen, it's a more calming version. Even more calming if you use your nose. So you can increase your oxygen at a much gentler pace, and you can encourage a more calm nervous system, more relaxed muscle fibers that will be more conducive to allowing the lengthening of those muscle fibers so they stretch properly rather than potentially get injured. If you force a stretch, it's easy to lead to injury over time, but you don't notice it until your joints and your muscles have been doing it for so long that finally you turn your head and all of a sudden, I pulled something in my neck. How did that happen? Probably high levels of tonus, the unconscious muscular tension level that you have in those muscles, in addition to a weakening of the muscles through stretching without allowing them to relax properly. These are really common factors for why we can get easily injured. Okay, so noticing you can breathe into your upper lungs and your lower lungs with your belly expanding. Belly breath, or some people call that baby breaths. If you watch a baby sleeping, you can see their belly often will move because they're breathing so deeply. They're so calm, so relaxed and sleeping. But another area you can focus on, and this is an area that I highly recommend you focus on to develop getting more oxygen in your recovery, is the width of your lower ribs. You can put your hands pinching inward on your ribs, and as you inhale, try and expand those ribs into your hands, like so. You can see the width of my ribs increasing, and you can push in with your hands to allow it to come back in as you exhale. Inhale, expand the ribs. This is also in yoga circles, they often talk about breathing into your kidneys. This is expanding into your back, into your sides, into your kidney area, you might say. So widening those ribs as you inhale is a great way to get extra oxygen while also breathing low. So it's not as stimulating as the upper lung breath. Now, to get oxygen to your system, generally speaking, we use all parts. We allow a flow of breath to your upper, your lower, and widthwise into your back, and so on, the full lung expansion with a long exhale. Remember, inhales are stimulating, lengthening your exhales are calming. So, making sure you get enough oxygen while you're in your active rest, you're just taking note. Okay, where is my breath going? Wherever it's not going, often it's the expansion of the lower ribs. After you inhale all the way with your chest and your belly, try a little extra expansion into your lower ribs each inhale. That'll ensure that you're getting a little bit more oxygen to your muscles to help with that active recovery while you're moving at that lower intensity and or stretching, which is another wonderful way to engage in active recovery. Deepen your inhale and only deepen it as much as you feel, okay, I need that amount of oxygen. I need that amount of stimulation to wake up awareness. That inhale you can focus on to the degree that it allows you to get enough oxygen. And remember, you can calibrate that by noticing the subtle signals in your front, okay, in your internal organs, chest, solar plexus, belly, your gut feelings, right? Could also be other areas, as I mentioned before. Okay, so while you're moving and breathing, it's very common when we're doing something new, let's say you're just starting an exercise program, even just going for a walk and focusing on dropping your tailbone to release your lower back and marionette string and relaxing your shoulders so that you're vertically aligned with space. There's a lot less tension. You want to learn more about that, you can go to my video on my website called 10 Minutes of Awareness, where I go over alignment principles. You might just be focusing on the basics of alignment as you're walking. And because it's new, because you're learning, often with new things, the body will automatically go into a caution mode, a stilling mode, and the breath will stop. And we don't realize that's happening. So I point this out because that's actually indicative of that highest level of stress, that red light response, shutdown response, when the breath is held. And the body will, even if we're not in a shutdown mode, if we're holding our breath because we're, often happens when we're learning something new, the body will get the signal, oh, I need to be in shutdown mode because you stopped breathing. So breathing will stop automatically and when we're in that mode. But if you're stopping breathing for another reason, it will give the signal to the body like, oh, maybe I need to be in that mode. So it's a reinforcing positive feedback loop. The way you breathe, it reinforces your state shifts your breathing. Okay, so while you're moving and you're doing this new thing, always shift your attention back, if it's comfortable, to what your breath is doing. Just check. Put your hand on your belly and or your chest, one or the other or both, and just notice movement. Okay, I was holding my breath and now it's flowing again, now that I'm focusing on it, and so on and so forth. Okay, so the theme for today is recovery from your workouts, and this supports regulation because we want to have a balance between that stress-based exertion and that calm experience of rest and recovery, of being at ease, reducing tension again so that we can recover fully. So I just want to make sure to reiterate some of the points of today's lesson. So rest is equally important for improving fitness as it is to exert yourself in order to improve your strength, flexibility, endurance, all the different aspects of fitness that help your health and well-being be more well supported. I've talked about in other episodes that as you increase your capacity for strength, for endurance, for flexibility, this is improving your capacity to manage stress. You actually are doing stress management by getting stronger. The traditional exercise typically doesn't look at lowering your overall average of stress that the body holds, the automatic set point, you might say. It's something referred to as the, not homeostasis, that's the balance of all the systems, but allostasis, the set point of, okay, so my set point default is at the lowest level of stress, or what if my set point is being revved up and hyperactive all the time? Or if it's in shutdown, if I'm chronically depressed or spaced out, not able to focus. We need to lower your average level of stress, your allostasis. Your allostatic load, when it's too high, will result in all sorts of unresolved trauma symptoms, whether you actually experienced a traumatic event or not. Chronic stress will result in your body expressing symptoms of trauma that's unresolved, like depression, like anxiety, like digestive issues, like immune system challenges, autoimmunity, and so on. Energy levels are too high, hyperactive, or too low because you're in shutdown. These are all symptoms that your stress has been too high. Okay, so my point in saying this is traditional exercise typically works you hard so you can handle more stress, but it doesn't lower your default like I focus on in holistic fitness training, in regulated habits. What are you doing to lower your set point of your stress levels? That's important to recognize. And getting proper rest, not just being sedentary between workouts, but moving at a very gentle pace and breathing properly is so important so that you can reduce that muscle soreness, calibrate your workouts, make sure you're not overworking yourself so that you're not stuck in shutdown. Overworking will result in shutdown. It's often called overtraining syndrome. When people get to the point where they can't exert themselves, you need to check in with yourself. After my workouts, am I recovering properly? Is it taking 2, 3, 4 days at the most to not feel soreness anymore? Is my strength level back, or is my strength compromised? That's a sign that you're working too hard. We need to find a level that's appropriate for where you are. And that's where active rest and recovery come in. And so having proper rest between workouts is so important, but not just being sedentary. So thanks for tuning in for this episode on recovery, the warrior's rest, you might call it. I've been talking about the theme in this meetup group of the compassionate warrior, the warrior archetype, to mobilize that energy to work hard, but doing it in a way where you're connected to your heart, right? Not a warrior's archetype for the sake of violence, but for the sake of protection, for the sake of calling on those deep reserves of motivation and energy that we all have within us, that warrior archetype. Okay, thank you for joining me for week 9, The Warrior's Rest, viewing recovery as a time to rebuild purpose. And that is one thing that you can connect with when you continue to go into these cycles of working hard and recovering fully, is you can connect to how effective am I in my purpose, whatever that may be in your life. I'm Mike Thomas. Welcome to Regulated Habits. Thank you for joining and have a wonderful week. Cheers.